Chapter 9. Reporting for Duty. Quote, "We sleep safely at night because rough men stand ready to visit violence on those who would harm us." End quote. Richard Grenier. Army basic training is hard, no matter what year you go through it. And back in 1966, with a war raging on the other side of the world, the urgency for creating the perfect fighting man was at its peak. The Army would either mold that new recruit or break them in the process. The individual meant nothing, because the team meant everything. Flaherty started his physical training several months before entering the Army. He received his exercise regimen from his childhood friend James Connolly, who was already working as an athletic trainer. The two started their days with 5-mile runs in Stamford's Cummings Park, ending with a quarter-mile sprint on the beach in the sand. The next 2 hours were devoted to weightlifting and calisthenics. In those few months, Flaherty built his body from a thin 92 pounds to a rock-solid 103 pounds of pure muscle. October 10th, 1966. Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Basic training. Fear of the unknown is on full display as a Greyhound bus full of fresh-faced recruits pulls into the Army base at Fort Jackson. The earlier bravado and all-around grab-assing during the 2-hour ride comes to a halt as the bus passes under the foreboding "Welcome to Fort Jackson" sign. Located near the state capital of South Carolina, Fort Jackson is the largest and most active initial entry training center for the U.S. Army. Created in 1917 and named after Major General Andrew Jackson, a.k.a. Old Hickory, Fort Jackson served as the newest Army facility to train fighting men during World War I. It is a crisp October morning. As soon as the doors slide open, a drill instructor explodes into the bus, barking orders faster than the startled young men can comprehend. With every unintelligible word firing out of his mouth, the angrier he becomes. No one really understands the drill instructor at first, but some words are made very clear thanks to the punctuating finger he jabs at the end of his shaking hand. "You filthy maggots, get off my bus now!" The spit from his mouth flies in all directions to spatter the young men, who are too scared to even wipe it from their faces. Stiff with anxiety and confusion, the men awkwardly try to make their way off the bus, moving like a herd of frightened antelope. The only exception to the panic is the driver, who sits quietly in his seat, enjoying this rerun of the show he's seen a dozen times before, waiting to see which one will start crying and who will freak out. Flaherty is also watching the show and taking notes. As he shrewdly sizes up his competition, he leaps off the bus and runs to the vertical yellow inspection line, an uncanny feeling of calmness and belonging flooding his senses. The bellowing, colorful abuse the drill instructor spouts at the hapless young men is nothing compared to the lifetime of insults and ridicule he's already endured. These instructors are experts in mental warfare, and Flaherty relishes the challenge. Because the new recruits are so attentive to the drill instructor's barking instructions, they are given permission to comfortably relax in the front-leaning position, also known as a push-up. As most of the men struggle at the count of 30, Flaherty is just getting warmed up. Flaherty and the other recruits are marched into a long green building. There, a non-commissioned officer assigned to uniform detail stands slack-jawed, staring down at Flaherty. "You gotta be kidding me!" screams the NCO from behind the uniform counter. "Where the heck am I going to find a uniform to fit you?" Later that afternoon, on the football field-sized tarmac, Sergeant Baker, assigned to train the recruits of Delta Platoon, stalks over to the young men already lined up in formation. Here we go again. Let's see what this year's crop yields. After taking a deep breath, he walks down the formation line, carefully scrutinizing the fresh-faced recruits with their newly buzzed haircuts. After eyeing several 6-foot-tall soldiers, he stops dead in his tracks. The next man in line barely reaches to the last soldier's shoulder. Staring down at Flaherty, Baker mutters, "What the heck is this?" "Private Flaherty, Sergeant!" "Son, what on God's green earth are you doing wearing that uniform?" Baker looks around the base suspiciously. Is he being pranked? "Sergeant, this is not the goddamn Marines. You don't say sergeant here, boy. You will address me as drill sergeant." Baker scratches at his head, still not buying into it. This someone's idea of a joke? Loudly, he barks, "At ease, men! Boy, you follow me." Baker turns sharply on his heel and marches toward the officers' headquarters, Flaherty following close behind. Stopping outside of the captain's office, Baker turns to Flaherty. "If this is legit, who the hell did you con? The Army don't allow anyone under 5 feet tall, and you ain't no more than 4'10". 4'9" to be exact, and I promise you, drill sergeant, this is no con. It took me dozens of letters and phone calls to get my congressman and a 3-star general to finally recommend me. Is that so? Baker sneers. Turning, he knocks heavily on the captain's door. Captain Adams' office, 0700 hours. Flaherty is standing at attention in Captain Adams' office. Adams is seated at his desk, smoking a foul-smelling cigar and looking through paperwork, while Baker stands rigidly across from him. Baker is unable to contain himself. "There's no way, sir. This has got to be a screw-up. For Pete's sake, this kid has no chance of even lasting a day out here." Adams, still reading, holds up a hand. "Sergeant, hold on," Baker interrupts. "I'm sorry, sir, but if this isn't a joke, then you got to transfer him somewhere else, 'cause he's going to get someone hurt." Flaherty, without permission, pipes in as he turns to Baker. "Give me a chance, Sarge. Throw everything you got at me, 'cause I can take it. You ain't going to break me, and I'm not going to quit." Adams puts down his paperwork and laughs. "Little son of a gun does have a set of balls. His paperwork seems to be all in order. Look, Sergeant, I agree with you." He turns to Flaherty. "And son, no disrespect, but you really don't belong here." He turns back to Baker and states, "But if you can't break him, you're stuck." Baker, without waiting to be dismissed, pivots and stalks out of the room. "We'll see about that," he barks over his shoulder. At first, his fellow recruits didn't say anything to Flaherty or comment about his size. The fear and shock of the first few days were too much for them to focus on anything else. Everything moved at a breakneck pace. A typical day consisted of an early rise at 0400 hours, a 5 or 6 mile run, and then breakfast. After breakfast, there would be training at either the rifle range, the sandpit for hand-to-hand combat and calisthenics, or the obstacle course. Then lunch, then off to more running. That was how it went, non-stop, day in and day out, under the watchful, unblinking eyes of the drill instructors. As days turned to weeks, everyone in the company became more at ease with the routine and more comfortable with each other. Nicknames and joke-filled insults began to fly in the barracks. No one was immune from the razzing, and Flaherty took more than his share of dwarf and leprechaun jokes. Charlie Skaggs was the only recruit who openly objected to Flaherty being in the platoon. Skaggs was a scrapping 6-foot-tall 200-pounder from the steel mills of Pennsylvania. Working in the mills was all the Skaggs family knew until the mid-50s, when the industry, plagued by soaring costs and declining profits, started massive layoffs. Skaggs had a chip on his shoulder starting on day one, and now he had Flaherty in his sights as his target. One night in the barracks, before lights out, Skaggs makes his case in front of the other recruits. Pointing an accusatory finger in Flaherty's face, he chides. "How the fuck is Private Dwarf gonna carry any of us if we go down in the NAM, huh? I say he needs to try the Boy Scouts before he thinks of becoming a soldier, and if he don't want to go, I say we give him some help." Flaherty listens to Skaggs' speech without reacting, instead getting himself ready for bed. A couple of other recruits also have their doubts about Flaherty's effectiveness in combat, but they keep their opinions to themselves. They, like most of the other men, are more concerned with getting through basic training than worrying whether some tiny guy belongs or not. The following morning, the drill instructors enter the barracks for an inspection. Flaherty's bed and footlocker are always in perfect condition. He confidently stands at attention in front of his bunk. Sergeant Baker is about to move on to the next man when he decides to check the interior of Flaherty's footlocker. All of Flaherty's uniforms are crumpled into piles, and in the corner is food from the commissary, which is strictly prohibited in the barracks. "What the fuck is this, Private Mindy Mouse?" Flaherty calmly looks over his shoulder and acknowledges the infractions. "Well, I'm waiting for a fucking answer." Flaherty says nothing and stands stoically at attention, with his eyes forward. Baker, looking toward Drill Sergeant Amos, yells, Sergeant Amos, you take Private Flaherty and administer a little disciplinary physical training by running him into the dirt until he explains why he would disrespect the Army and my hospitality by allowing him the privilege to live and train at Fort Jackson. Private Mighty Mouse, get your ass out the barracks and run as fast as you can to the range so we can become better acquainted, barks Sergeant Amos. As Flaherty sprints out of the room, Skaggs, standing in front of his bunk at the back of the barracks, allows himself a slight grin. 5 hours later, Sergeant Amos follows Flaherty back into the camp. Flaherty's uniform is soaked in sweat and dirt, but his head is still held high, and his spirit isn't broken. God damn it, Flaherty, your uniform is a disgrace. Go get yourself cleaned up and squared away, then get some chow. Yes, Drill Sergeant! Amos eyeballs Flaherty as the little man makes his way back into his barracks. Amos then walks over to Sergeant Baker, who stands watching. Well? Asks Baker. I ran that little fucker up and down every hill on this base, and he wouldn't tell me who messed up his locker. Stubborn little prick, Amos says with a crooked smile. Look, Bob, I know you and some of the other guys are starting to take a liking to him, but honestly, you got to ask yourself, is he gonna be able to hack it in Nam? Tommy, why don't you cut the kid some slack? We've both seen those G.I. Joe squared-away-looking motherfuckers who crack once the rounds start coming in. Got to disagree with you on that one, Bob. And for the record, the captain is also on board with me helping Flaherty decide this isn't the right place for him. Sand Pit, 1300 hours. The following day, the recruits line up in front of Sergeant Baker at the sand pit for their hand-to-hand combat training. Sergeant Amos, along with the drill instructor, Gabe Walker, stand by on hand to supervise the drill. Gentlemen, today will be the first day you start training with a partner on the techniques we've taught you. I don't want to see any of that sloppy bar brawling. And remember, gentlemen, this is just training, so don't kill each other. Now, partner up! Flaherty turns to the man next to him, Private Jimmy Bernard. Bernard, who is one of the smaller men in the platoon, sighs with great relief. Baker watches the men pair up and decides to make some changes. Bernard, why don't you get with, Private Gonzalez, and Mr. Flaherty, partner up with Mr. Skaggs. Flaherty, without hesitation, runs over to the smiling Skaggs. Now, gentlemen, we will start out easy with a little warm-up drill, where I only want to see standing grappling with transitions into hip tosses. Once your partner is down, you will start on your feet again. You will go on my whistle, and you will only stop when you hear the whistle blow twice. Is that clear? Yes, Drill Sergeant! The platoon roars back in unison. Baker walks over to the other instructors with his whistle in hand as the nervous recruits size each other up. With a cruel smile, Skaggs says to Flaherty, I'm going to snap that little neck of yours. Flaherty doesn't respond, but focuses on the task at hand. Baker sees Amos disappointedly shaking his head. Sorry, Bob, it's time to separate the men from the boys. With that, Baker blows his whistle. Flaherty, without hesitation, launches himself straight at Skaggs in a blinding series of kicks and punches. The three sergeants gape as they watch the little Wolverine-like man attack his grizzly bear opponent with a ferociousness they've rarely seen before. Flaherty purposely targets Skaggs' knees, groin, eyes, and any other vulnerable areas on his body. Amos finally comes to his senses and yells, Hold it! Hold it! Everyone stop! All the recruits stop their exercises, except Flaherty and Skaggs, who are locked in a no-rules fight. Baker grabs Amos by the arm, shaking his head. They'll need to work it out themselves, 'cause I ain't blowing that whistle. The platoon now surrounds Flaherty and Skaggs as everyone, including the instructors, are caught up in watching the surreal moment. Flaherty throws a quick three-punch combination as a distraction to get Skaggs to focus on his hands. Flaherty uses the opportunity to hook his heel around Skaggs' foot, neatly tripping him to the sand. Skaggs can't believe he's now on the ground, seeing Flaherty looking down at him. With a metallic taste of blood in his mouth, he staggers back to his feet and grits his teeth. The fight isn't over yet. After the initial surprise of Flaherty's attack, Skaggs is finally able to grab the whirling little buzzsaw that's been chewing him up. He now easily ragdolls Flaherty, lifting him high in the air and slamming him down again and again into the ground. The recruits scream encouragement to the underdog, Flaherty. Fuck him up, Flaherty! Flaherty is eventually able to break out of Skaggs' grip, but the damage is done. and Flaherty is limping badly. Skaggs, whose nose is now leaking like a faucet, uses the opportunity to launch a series of big looping punches. Flaherty covers up as best he can and tries to roll with the blows, but the 100-pound deficit is apparent. Skaggs' punches make loud, thudding noises as they bounce off Flaherty's shoulders and ribs. One huge punch gets past Flaherty's guard and knocks him flat on his back. Skaggs, breathing deeply with blood dripping down his face, looks down at his opponent. "You had enough?" Flaherty spits out a wad of sticky blood from his mouth and says, "I ain't even started yet." With that, Flaherty, still on the ground, kicks upward to the inside of Skaggs' knee. Skaggs is knocked off balance as his knee hyperextends backward. The two gladiators continue their back-and-forth brawl for the next 2 minutes. Baker watches disbelievingly, never thinking that Flaherty would last more than 30 seconds. As the battered and bloody combatants exchange punches and kicks, Baker blows his whistle twice and steps in between the two men. "What do you think, Mr. Skaggs? Has he earned your respect?" Skaggs rubs his jaw and tests a loose tooth in his bleeding mouth. Out of breath, he answers, "Hell yeah." "Okay, you two take a breather on the bench." Baker watches the two men limp away, then turns and calls out to the platoon, "Bring it on in and take a knee." The platoon surrounds him in a half circle and falls to a knee. "You sorry-looking motherfuckers better have learned something from those two. You think I'm wrong for allowing them to fight? Baker stares into each man's eyes, awaiting a reply that he knows will never come. "Nope. Nobody? I know what you're all thinking. You're all thinking that I'm a cruel son of a bitch, and that wasn't a fair fight. Now get this in your heads. War ain't a fair fight. It's dirty. It's nasty. And you have to do whatever you gotta do to win. Killing another man in war isn't about honor or nobility. It's a matter of killing him before he kills you. It's that simple." As Flaherty and Skaggs walk towards the bench, Skaggs asks, "You think you could teach me some of those kicks?" "Sure, if you promise not to bounce me off the ground." The two men shake hands and sit down. After Flaherty's fight, the men of Delta Platoon looked upon him as their fiery little mascot. He was now their talisman, exemplifying the platoon's fighting spirit. The platoon would sometimes carry Flaherty on two of the men's shoulders as they ran in formation, Flaherty proudly perched in the air, holding the platoon's flag, waving it in disdain at the other platoons. Many times a drill instructor from another platoon would use Flaherty as an example to admonish some of their slackers. "If Delta Company's Mighty Mouse can make that 5-mile run wearing a 70-pound rucksack, you maggots damn well better smoke that course in record time!" Army Obstacle Course, 0900 hours. Adams is standing in a muddy field next to Baker, watching a squad of new soldiers trying to get over the wooden wall. Most of the soldiers are just barely able to jump high enough to grab the top of the wall. In the background, a drill sergeant screams a profanity-laced tirade of encouragement to help motivate the men. Adams, full of skepticism, asks, "And you're telling me he's able to make it?" Baker shakes his head. "Just wait and you'll see." "But how can he?" Adams starts to ask as Flaherty's squad rounds a bend in the road and Flaherty is leading the pack. As Flaherty approaches the wall, without breaking stride, he pulls a screwdriver from his pants pocket, sharpened down to look like a reinforced ice pick. With the tool in hand, he deftly springs as high as he can onto the wall. His momentum drives the spike end deep enough into the wall to bear his weight. He pulls himself up with one arm and quickly grabs the top of the wall while removing his modified screwdriver. Adams shakes his head in disbelief. Looks like a goddamn tree frog skating up a tree. Once sitting on top of the wall, Flaherty replaces the screwdriver in his pocket, hops down, and keeps running the course. "Well, I'll be damned. Do the regulations allow that?" "No one's ever tried it before, so there's technically nothing in the regs to disqualify him. Little bastard always finishes in the top 5. "And all the other PT requirements?" Adams asks. "I first tried running him into the ground, and even though his goddamn rucksack weighs more than him, he wouldn't quit. He outperforms his entire squad in calisthenics. He can literally do push-ups for hours. Hand-to-hand combat, he gets tossed around quite a bit, but always gets back on his feet. I thought he would have gotten murdered in the pugil sticks, but he's got the agility of a spider monkey. No one can hit him with a clean shot. Little half-pint made a believer out of me. I say he stays." Adams shakes his head and adds, "Unfucking believable." March 1st, 1967. AIT School, Fort McClelland, Alabama. Flaherty, in his third month of advanced individual training, is lying in his cot looking through his mail and opens a letter from the Army. He quickly scans it, and a big smile comes across his face. The letter reads, "Congratulations, you are officially accepted to apply for Officer Candidate School." Getting the offer for Officer Candidate School, or OCS, is another massive accomplishment because Army regulations state all officer applicants have to be at least 5 feet 4 inches tall to apply. Flaherty once again relied on his brother Walter to start up a letter-writing campaign to have that rule waived. This time, Walter went even higher up the political chain in reaching out for help. Finally, U.S. Senator Thomas J. Dodd, father of Senator Christopher Dodd, stepped forward and assisted Flaherty in receiving the waiver. The waiver didn't mean acceptance. It only allowed him to apply for the school through an interview process. The interview is conducted in an empty wooden barracks, causing sounds to echo weirdly around the room. As Flaherty enters the room, he's met by a board of 3 stone-faced officers seated behind a heavy, worn metal desk that looks like it might have seen some combat in its day. Flaherty is motioned to sit on the one solitary wooden chair in the room, 10 feet away from the desk. A fluorescent light hangs above him, buzzing intermittently and giving off a yellowish hue. The officers ask a number of questions, then pass around his file to review his record. They huddle in deep discussion, while Flaherty sits upright and stares straight ahead. The ranking officer, Captain Jake Scott, asks one last question of Flaherty before he is dismissed. "Private Flaherty, let's just cut to the chase. There's a reason why we have strict guidelines on height requirements for all our leaders. For effective leadership, the troops have to respect the man they are entrusting their lives to as he leads them into battle. Our other concern is, we don't want any officers in the position of power to abuse it if they had, let's say, a chip on their shoulder or a Napoleonic complex. My question to you is, how would you win the men over and become an effective leader? And how would you handle the adversity and jokes about your size?" Flaherty takes a moment to think, then launches confidently into, "First, I would never ask any man to do anything I wasn't willing to do first. I believe leaders, especially in a time of crisis, need to step to the front and lead by example. But in times of stability, ease off the reins and allow the men to rely on their training and instinct in order to build their own self-confidence. I also consider leadership to be a privilege to better others, as opposed to using it as an opportunity to just satisfy my ego. And about my size, I've faced a lot of kidding about my stature. I don't take it to heart, I just let it roll off my back. If they persist, I'd ask them to step outside and handle it like a man, while telling them that I'm 85 pounds of muscle, 14 pounds of dynamite, and 1 pound of shit-kicking uranium-238. Flaherty's voice booms as he delivers his last line, causing it to echo around the room. Flaherty's answer causes a halt to all paper shuffling and note writing. Shocked looks from the panel aim at Flaherty, but he doesn't flinch. Alone in his chair, he relishes the challenge and stares back into each officer's face. Captain Scott is the first of the 3 to break his composure and let out a hearty belly laugh. The other 2 officers, unable to restrain themselves, chuckle and shake their heads. On February 8, 1967, Flaherty started his 6-month Officer Candidate School tour at Fort Benning, Georgia. Ken Dietz, who attended that same class, remembered that tiny little guy Flaherty. "I remember when I first saw him at Benning's School for Boys inside the barracks, and we'd all walk around in our skivvies, our boxer shorts. Now, as shocking as it was to see him in a uniform, that, by the way, never fit him, but to see him in just his skivvies, you really could see just how small he was. I mean, we'd do these rifle drills, and he would have trouble swinging his rifle around because it was almost as tall as he was. But I never heard him complain, and he did everything we all did, and then some. There was this one time we were marching over the parade ground, and another company was marching the opposite way. The men in the other platoon started ragging on Flaherty, pointing and laughing, and one guy screams, "Hey, why the hell did they let a midget in the Army?" And Flaherty didn't hesitate and screamed back, "Because I got brass balls." He was defiant. He was cocky, and that's what I remember about Flaherty. September 3rd, 1967. Jump School, Fort Benning, Georgia. Inside the crowded C-19 transport plane, better known as the flying boxcar, 2 rows of jumpers, known as sticks, wait nervously for their turn. Flaherty and the other troops are given the order to stand up and hook up. They secure the snap hooks from their main parachutes to a long wire strung the length of the plane. Jumpmaster Sergeant Stone diligently walks up and down the plane, conducting safety checks on his men's equipment as the old aircraft shudders and bucks. Stone mutters to himself the old Jumpmaster adage that it's scarier to fly in a C-19 than it is to jump out of it. Stone walks over to Flaherty and rechecks the duct tape job he performed earlier. Flaherty is the only soldier with machine gun parts taped to his legs. Stone shouts over the roar of the engines.
"Look, son, I'm not sure that's going to be enough weight to keep you from drifting off, so remember to use all the techniques we taught you."
Stone turns to the first man in line, who is standing at the open exit door, and shouts,
"Go!"
The man hesitates, frozen in the door, until another jumpmaster provides him the proper assistance by booting him out of the plane with his size 12s. Stone screams to Flaherty, who's next in line, the command,
"Stand in the door!"
Like every other jumper on board, Flaherty is carrying 2 separate parachutes. On his back is the main parachute, known as the T-10, and in front of him is a smaller reserve chute in case things go bad. Below his reserve chute is his rucksack, which for most men hangs at knee level, but on Flaherty hangs to his feet. Flaherty struggles forward awkwardly, baby-stepping towards the door, as the rucksack bounces up and back off his lower shins. Stone turns to the other jumpmaster and yells over the wing,
"We jerry-rigged the shit out of his equipment, but who knows what the hell's going to happen? He might be blown all the way to Hawaii."
Stone sees Flaherty has his hands on each side of the door. He's properly leaning forward. He screams the order,
"Go!"
Flaherty fearlessly leaps out of the plane at 1,250 feet above the earth and is blasted backward by the wind. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. Snap! Flaherty's canopy pops open. His fall jerks to a stop, and everything becomes quiet as he enjoys his seemingly slow descent.